All right, let's jump right into this explainer. We're looking at a pretty wild situation where a massive taxpayer investment literally went up in smoke, turning into twisted, smoldering metal and completely derailing our return to the moon. You see, Jeff Bezos' Blue Origin was heavily banked upon to be the safe, reliable backup system for the Artemis program. They were supposed to ensure American astronauts had a highly secure route back to the lunar surface. But instead, a series of compounding disasters has effectively grounded those ambitions, turning a backup plan into a single point of failure. So we're going to break down exactly what went wrong here, look at the corporate culture behind the scenes, and figure out what this all means for the future of space exploration.
So $3.4 billion. Let that massive number sink in for a second, because that is exactly how much of your tax money was tied to the Blue Origin Artemis V lunar lander. We are not talking about monopoly money here. This was a highly lucrative government contract handed to a relative newcomer in the orbital spaceflight arena. Now, NASA awarded this thinking it was a solid investment in a steady, methodical partner. The ship they were funding was slated to be the first crewed mission to land on the moon since the 1970s. But here's the catch. When you tie billions of taxpayer dollars to a proprietary, privately held rocket program, you inherently link the success of our entire national space program to the success of a single corporation. Which brings us to Section 1, the domino effect.
You really can't look at this as just one freak accident. It's a chain reaction of failures that has completely reset the timeline for the highly anticipated Artemis 3 mission. What was once seen as the next giant leap for humanity, well, it's now been heavily downgraded into a mere systems test for rendezvous and docking technology. This wasn't just a sudden, out-of-the-blue mishap. It was a rapid unraveling in early 2026. On April 11th, the entire world was celebrating as the Artemis 2 crew safely returned to Earth. But within days, literally days, viral drone footage spotted mysterious roof damage at Blue Origin's 2CAT manufacturing facility, which forced a temporary government shutdown of operations there. Then, by late April, the FAA was opening a formal investigation after a test launch failed to reach orbit. The pressure was mounting incredibly fast, setting the stage for a spectacular disaster just 1 month later.
Because on May 28th, the static fire test didn't just total the New Glenn rocket, it completely destroyed the dedicated launch infrastructure at Cape Canaveral. They were testing the third first-stage booster, aiming to put it under the extreme pressures of a real launch. But instead, they exposed a devastating vulnerability. The resulting blast created a catastrophic chain reaction that destroyed both Stage 1 and Stage 2 of the rocket. Now, thankfully, incredibly fast action meant no one on the ground was injured, but it ripped entirely through Launch Complex 36. You absolutely cannot just sweep an explosion of this magnitude under the rug. It literally vaporized the physical foundation needed for any future launches.
Let's move to Section 2, failing fast versus failing hard. To really understand why this explosion was so catastrophic, we have to look at the drastically different corporate philosophies driving the modern space race. It's not just about the hardware, right? It's about how these companies handle setbacks, how they iterate, and how their underlying business models dictate their engineering strategies. Industry analysts point out a crucial comparison here. Elon Musk's SpaceX intentionally plans to fail to learn quickly. If you follow SpaceX, you see rockets blowing up all the time. It makes for tough PR, for sure, but it's an intentional, fail-fast approach to test prototypes early and rebuild stronger. On the flip side, critics note Blue Origin operates heavily in the shadows. They focus on a pristine public image and a principle of slow, triple-checked engineering. But the huge problem with building in total secrecy is that when a major structural issue finally slips through undetected late in the game, the resulting failure doesn't just provide a learning opportunity, it breaks the entire system. Which leads us directly into Section 3, the B-4 engine bottleneck. Ultimately, a rocket is only as reliable as its engines, and the proprietary technology Blue Origin decided to bet absolutely everything on has proven to be an incredible liability. There is a massive, glaring discrepancy in development time here, exposing a rigid Blue Origin process that's been plagued by overheating issues and complex supply chains for liquid methane. The BE-4 engine is incredibly powerful, utilizing liquefied methane and a staged combustion cycle. But this complexity introduces a myriad of potential failure points. While SpaceX took 7 years to get their Raptor engine flight ready, the BE-4 took a grueling 13 years. And because it relies on large quantities of methane and liquid oxygen, even tiny delays in sourcing materials can ripple through the entire build process. It makes the company's demand for state-of-the-art perfection incredibly fragile. And because all their production is bottlenecked in a single Alabama plant, losing 7 engines in a single blast actually threatens missions across the entire U.S. aerospace industry. Blue Origin isn't just building engines for themselves. Back in 2014, their BE-4 engine was also selected by the United Launch Alliance for its Vulcan rocket. Now, a Vulcan needs 2 engines. A New Glenn requires 7. When that explosion happened on May 28th, all 7 engines were destroyed instantly. And here is the kicker. Because they are legally bound to fulfill outside demand for ULA first, Blue Origin can't even focus on replacing its own rockets yet. It is a massive industrial logjam. Let's step into Section 4, lobbying over engineering.
With all of these engineering bottlenecks, you might be wondering, how did they secure such a critical NASA deal in the first place? If the hardware takes twice as long to build and is prone to supply chain gridlock, how did Blue Origin position itself as a savior of the Artemis program? Well, the answer lies less in the laboratory and more in the courtroom. According to the 2026 Office of Inspector General report, every single month of Artemis delays cost taxpayers $100 million just to maintain standby hardware. The space program is a tightly connected system of training, testing, and infrastructure. So when the New Glenn launch system stalls, the Space Launch System and Orion hardware still have to be maintained. They just sit there, in sync, burning $100 million a month in the background. It is an extraordinary financial bleed. Reports show how Jeff Bezos essentially utilized his $254 billion net worth to pivot to litigation and lobbying when his initial bids fell short. Back in 2021, a lower-than-expected budget allocation forced NASA to choose just one partner. They chose SpaceX because of their history of coming in under budget. Bezos immediately sued the Government Accountability Office alongside Dynetics. While the lawsuit failed, it successfully paused SpaceX's work for 7 crucial months, throwing NASA way off schedule. Simultaneously, Bezos ramped up lobbying efforts, dropping roughly $2 million to convince lawmakers that NASA desperately needed a backup. The political pressure play worked perfectly, netting his company an even larger $3.4 billion contract. All right, let's look behind the curtain in Section 5, Amazon, Culture, and Space. So Amazon became an absolute powerhouse by targeting fragmented retail sectors, undercutting competition, and establishing an overwhelming, methodical monopoly. But building rockets isn't exactly like shipping books, right? Employee reviews on platforms like Glassdoor highlight a document-heavy, intensely litigious bureaucracy that treats highly specialized rocket engineers like warehouse workers. The big tech culture that Bezos thrives on prizes ruthless competitiveness. But in aerospace, subjecting brilliant engineers to aggressive performance evaluations and intense quota systems can create a deeply strained environment. It turns out that top-tier aerospace engineers operating in one of the most competitive fields on the planet do not always respond well to being micromanaged by a bureaucracy that's more focused on slowing down competitors than out-innovating them. Because at the end of the day, you simply cannot buy your way out of a toxic workplace. Aerospace insiders argue this massive brain drain is severely hampering the company's capabilities. They saw a major wave of talent leave right after losing that initial 2021 contract to SpaceX. And even more ominously, Blue Origin laid off up to 1,000 workers, roughly 10% of their total workforce after the maiden New Glenn launch, framing it as just a standard restructuring. But you can't push out the very people who actually know how to build the hardware and expect state-of-the-art results. Industry watchers are correlating this loss of institutional knowledge directly with the catastrophic hardware failures we are seeing on the launch pad today. Which brings us to our final part, Section 6, losing the space race. This is where we see the ultimate consequence of this corporate meltdown, zooming out from a domestic rivalry to a high-stakes global threat. We aren't just talking about a delayed PR stunt or some lost corporate profits here. We are talking about the potential forfeiture of American dominance in the next frontier. You might look at this drama and ask, is this just a clash of massive egos, a petty battle between Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk to see who can claim the stars first? But the true implications are profoundly geopolitical. While Bezos managed to successfully monopolize critical delivery systems through lobbying, ensuring that the next big launch couldn't happen without his company, the resulting failure now creates a devastating vacuum on the world stage. Because while America struggles with a heavily delayed, compromised rocket infrastructure, China is advancing quietly and rapidly toward the lunar surface. Now, because the Chinese space program operates under incredibly tight wraps, it is impossible for the public to know exactly how close they are to a crewed launch. But we do know their government-run program is aggressively ramping up. To put that into perspective, the absolute best-case scenario right now puts the U.S. return to the moon at 2028. If China executes a successful mission before then, the delays caused by these engineering bottlenecks and corporate stalemates will have handed a monumental victory to a geopolitical rival. So, we have to leave you with this final provocative thought to consider. Did the pursuit of an aerospace monopoly just cost the United States the next great space race?
Jeff Bezos successfully applied his retail domination playbook to secure his massive piece of the space pie, but it seems like you simply can't litigate your way to the moon. When the sheer determination to dominate an industry results in a string of falling dominoes that grounds an entire nation's ambitions, we really have to ask if the price of admission was simply too high. Well, that's all for this explainer. Keep looking up and stay curious.